Ajahn Brahm, will you ever disrobe? Is there any reason why you will disrobe?
Ajahn Brahmavamso is the abbot of Bodhinyana Monastery and spiritual patron, advisor, and director of several Buddhist organizations across the world. A much sought-after speaker, he is best known for delivering Buddha's teachings with humor, making them accessible by people from all walks of life. A graduate of Cambridge University, he taught in high school for 1 year before traveling to Thailand to become a monk and trained with the Venerable Ajahn Chah Bodhinyana Mahathera. In 2009, his actions of facilitating an ordination ceremony for bhikkhunis, the first time for the Thai forest tradition, led to his removal from the Ajahn Chah forest Sangha lineage. That did not stop him from continuing to support and grow the bhikkhuni community. For his tireless work, Ajahn Brahm was awarded the Order of Australia General Division Medal for services to Buddhism and gender equality. At Awaken, we learn about his incredible journey as a monk and monastic leader and his fight or mission to break the Buddhism glass ceiling and elevate bhikkhunis in the Theravada tradition.
Thank you for being with us today. It's indeed an honor and pleasure.
It's a great pleasure to be of service.
Thank you. So if you could start a bit at the beginning when you discovered Buddhism.
The way I found Buddhism, I won my first school prize when I was 16. It was for the A-levels. And my teacher told me to go to Foyle's bookshop in Tottenham Court Road and get some books on maths, because that was my strong point. And I thought, I'm not going to waste my first school prize on boring books on mathematics. So instead I went on the opposite side of the road to the top story. They had all the weird books. And honestly, I wanted to find out about spirituality and find out exactly what religions taught. And then when I started reading my first book on Buddhism, it didn't convert me. It told me who I already was. I already had those beliefs. The first time I found out what their name was.
And how is it different from Christianity or even Islam?
First of all, it had no creator God. And the responsibility was much more placed on the individual. Rather than you being told to do, you've been told how to find out what to do. And a very clear path of meditation, contemplation, finding out the truth for yourself.
And you were doing all that as a child at 16?
Yeah, in a very superficial way, but I was interested in science. That's why I became a physicist, because I thought that would teach me about the nature of the world and of the universe. Because many religions talk about how the universe is controlled, where it started, and the physics gave a much better explanation to that than anything I'd ever seen.
In 1974, you were ordained as a monk in Thailand.
Yes.
Embracing Buddhism is one thing, but embracing monkhood is another. It's quite a big decision for anyone. So how do you know that was the right path for you?
So of course you don't know at first. But a weird thing which happened, after I ordained as a novice monk, first of all, it was in Bangkok, in Wat Saket. And after I was ordained as a novice monk, the first 3 nights, and this is no exaggeration, I remember this clearly, the first 3 nights I would have a nightmare, wake up in the middle of the night, sort of sweating, feeling so anxious. But my nightmare was that I was a layman and not a monk. When I opened my eyes, I saw the robes folded neatly next to the mat on the floor where I slept. I really am a monk. And then I closed my eyes and go into a very deep, peaceful sleep. And that reoccurred the next 2 nights as well. And that really told me that I'd found my niche in life. I wanted to be a monk. And to this day, I've never thought of doing anything other than being a monk.
Actually, there might have been some doubts or uncertainties.
Look, it's weird, and not many monks can say this, but no, there was no uncertainties. There was no doubt at all. It was strange. I was only 23 at the time, but I knew this was the life I wanted to lead. And I became a bit notorious amongst the Sangha, the group of monks who I lived with, because if any monk thought of disrobing and leaving, many of them did. They would never come to see me because they knew I was just so into being a monk. I love this life. I've never regretted it.
What were the conditions that made you want to stay in this course, in this path?
Now that's a good question, because you look at it from day to day, you found you're being fulfilled. The job, the pay is terrible. We don't get any money as monks. The work is very hard. Sometimes people feel it's an easy life being a monk. But you know, you get very, very tired. It's a very hard lifestyle, a lot of hard work, but you get a lot of joy with it. And whenever you're tired, I know how to meditate. That's what I was doing in there after I came back. Went into my room and just, not sleeping, but crossing my legs and meditating. That sort of energizes you. And all the time I've seen how it fulfills my life and fulfills other people's lives as well. Now, when somebody comes up and tells you that, and it's so honest and so meaningful, that really sort of hits you inside. You know, you've actually done something. You've helped somebody. And how can you give up a career with such amazing job fulfillment?
In the early 1980s, you moved to Australia.
Yes.
On the invitation of the then Venerable Ajahn Jagaro to help set up Bodhinaya in Perth, Australia.
Yeah.
What were some lessons that you took away from that early experiences?
Those early experiences is that leadership is something I found that people give to you. You don't take. They look upon you as a leader. And it's because they check you out for a while and make sure you've got the qualities which can lead. And if they see those qualities, then they will confer leadership on you, not by some ceremony, but it becomes like a natural growth, almost like the highest flower in the field, can see further. And so because of those qualities, which I showed at that time, that leadership was given to me. But that leadership can be taken away at any time. It's if you're still performing. You're still doing wonderful things for the Buddhist community in the world. And if you are, you will continue with that leadership. The actual legal terms of my leadership position in Perth is I'm elected by the local community of monks. And at any time they can decide they've had enough of me and they don't have confidence in me anymore, and they can actually tell me to leave. It sounds actually quite attractive because I can have a much easier life. But no, it's not that. It's because you are doing a good job.
What are these qualities that people look for?
Well, it depends. If it's for a Buddhist community, they want somebody who does understand some of those deeper teachings of the Buddha from experience. There's one of the other monks who comes here to Malaysia, Ajahn Brahmali. If next time he comes here, you should ask him, why do you have such confidence in Ajahn Brahm? And it's because you can, your experiences in deep meditation and understanding the teachings of the Buddha can be so deep, and you can live those teachings. You can be inspired by how other people live. So that's why there's many of the monks over in my monastery. I call it my monastery, but the monastery where I live, I don't own it. And for the nuns' monastery, they think, well done. This really means something to us, that you've got a person who's a monk, who's leading by example. So that means they fall behind you. I always say a leader should lead not just by words, but by their actions.
When Venerable Ajahn Jagaro disrobed,
Yeah.
and from what I read, you were hesitant to take over as the abbot. And could
Yeah.
you describe that hesitation?
Indeed. Because Ajahn Jagaro at that time, he was highly regarded in Thailand and also very well regarded in many other countries of the world, including Malaysia. And when he disrobed, the people lost a lot of faith. It hurt them, spiritually. And I contemplated for about 2 or 3 days, Ajahn Brahm, will you ever disrobe? Is there any reason why you will disrobe? Because if there was even the slightest doubt that I would stay in these robes and die in these robes, if there was the slightest doubt about that, I couldn't bring myself to lead because I wasn't leading by example. I didn't want to disappoint other people as I'd seen Ajahn Jagaro just disappoint so many of his senior disciples.
How do you manage that crisis, if you could call it a crisis back then?
It's a crisis. Most of that crisis was from the lay community. When somebody gets hurt, sometimes they don't think straight. Often they look for someone to blame. You can't blame anyone. He was trying to do his best. I still have a lot of respect for Ajahn Jagaro. He's now a John Chinchiosi. He's still a good friend. And he's a very good man. But, he didn't have the opportunity, to live until he dies as a monk. But nevertheless, he did a lot of really good work. And I'm very thankful to him for that. So you don't have any ill will or hatred to him. It was just, this is what happens in life. So you have to let it be. So it was just people's reactions. What I would say was overreactions. And you had the opportunity then to build up your Sangha in a fresh way. One of the things which I did, which was quite revolutionary at the time, was I asked the monks who were staying at Bodhinyana Monastery with me, what type of monastery would you like? Instead of me assuming what they wanted, I asked them. And one of the things they wanted a place where they could practice meditation. And they didn't have so many duties. As I said, many monks get quite worn out, teaching, writing, serving, doing chanting for people who are sick, visiting them in hospital. There's so many duties we can do. And they're all very, very valuable. But our main duty is actually to become enlightened, to be peaceful, to have the experience inside so you can teach others. And so that's what they kept telling me. So you had to actually tell the lay community, look, the monastery over here is for the monks. You can come and stay, but on our conditions. We're not your janitors. We're not going to be your paid psychologists. Whenever you have a problem, you can't just come and see us. We will serve as much as we can. We have to draw back because we're in this to be able to get some deep wisdom, some stillness in the mind, and see deeper into the nature of things.
In 2009, that was a turning point, at least from my point of view. It's also, it was an interesting year. That year you facilitated the ordination of 4 bhikkhunis, and that action caused you to be excommunicated and removed from Ajahn Chah's lineage. How did that impact you?
It did not impact me very much at all, except for losing, a lot of friends you grew up with, but they're still my friends. And the excommunication, it was like you're not part of Wat Papong. No one can actually expel you from Ajahn Chah's lineage. He was my teacher. He always will be my teacher. Because Ajahn Chah is not Wat Papong. The person is not the organization. And it was very much worth it because now we have very, very strong bhikkhuni monasteries, not just in Perth, but in many other places of the world. It was something which needed to be done. And because it was supported by the monastic rules, the Vinaya, no one could actually just criticize me for that. Actually, at the time I thought this, I don't want to be part of that organization. If they want to ignore the Vinaya, the monks' rules, and if they want to treat somebody who supports the legitimate spiritual request of women to become bhikkhunis, if they just reject that out of hand, then I don't want to be part of that organization.
As a monastic leader, why is it important to support the bhikkhunis?
I'll give you 2 or 3 examples. There was one of the monks who came to stay with me to learn meditation. He's a very good monk, but he was from Holland. And part of the requirements, if you want to ordain as a monk, you have to get permission from your parents. So he went home to Holland and he asked his mother, and he said, "What type of monastery are you going to join? Is it a monastery which doesn't treat women with equity?" He said, "No, the abbot got kicked out of Wat Pah Pong for standing up for women." And she said straight away, "Okay, you can ordain there. I feel happy that my son is actually ordaining in a place which is reasonable." And even more recently, just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I went to give some teachings in Norway. And there in Norway, there's one of the disciples who's setting up a monastery. And it's required by the government to have equity. When he read of some of the other organizations, Buddhist organizations, that read their constitution, and he could not believe it, that they were forbidding bhikkhuni ordination in their monastery. He was saying this is illegal. In many parts of Europe, especially Scandinavia, that will make people look at Buddhism as some misogynistic, ancient religion which has no place in our modern world. It's like, imagine if we had a monastery here and say Africans could not become monks. Would that be fair? You'd not be able to get away with that. There is some understandings of the fairness which even government agencies have to practice towards people of different genders, people who are like disabled with polio. Of course you've got to treat people as fairly as you possibly can. And the idea of a religion, a spiritual path, not practicing like that is just unbelievable. So it's wonderful what we did. And it's only a matter of time that those sorts of ideas will become commonplace. And we'll have the full tradition of bhikkhunis in Malaysia, in Thailand, Sri Lanka, Burma, the whole world.
Giving more opportunities for women to become nuns, what I understand is that women or nuns have to observe more precepts, I think something like 311. And then for monks, it's only about 227.
So they should be higher than the monks.
Yeah, it sounds like that. And I'm just wondering whether, some of these rules may have existed because of tradition, because of the status of women at the time, but now women are a lot more empowered, a lot more educated.
Exactly.
Yeah, so do the rules need to change?
To change rules is quite difficult. But then from what you said, there's very few monks who keep those 227 rules perfectly.
Do you keep them perfectly?
No. There's 2 types of rules. One's called Panyati Vajja, another one's called Loka Vajja. Loka Vajja is what's seen as a fault in the world. Say like, killing somebody or hitting them. Everybody knows that's a fault. There's some other rules which are called Panyati Vajja, which is just a fault according to how the Buddha set these things up. like, sort of eating in the afternoon. The world would never see that as a bad mistake which a monk makes. But the Buddha said, no, we only eat in the morning time. So those are the differences. So if it's a Panyati Wajja, sometimes I'll tell the other monks, well, relax it a bit if you really need it. Because everything's a slippery slope. If you allow women to become ordained, there'll be bhikkhunis all over the place, and they'll take over Buddhism, and who knows what we can do next. Slippery slope arguments don't work. Instead, we just have, yes, there are dangers when you make decisions, but the dangers of not making those decisions are greater.
So they are trade-offs, and that's what a leader has to do, right?
They trade-off, and just to make sure you know what you're doing, and the trade-offs you put in place, little schemes, so there won't be any dangers.
And what sort of schemes?
One of the things which Buddhism is very strong for, it is the oldest continuous democratic institution in the world. It's always been run as a democracy. But the way it works is every monastic institution is independent of the other ones. So any decision you make here in a Malaysian monastery, you can do that, and it's independent. It doesn't hold for when you go to a place like Australia. We have some freedom there to make the rules which suit the monastery in which you live. And so because of that, we can sort of add a few little extra rules. As a leader, you make sure you know what you're talking about. And in the old days, I'm talking about in the Roman times, anybody who stood for election would wear white. And so people could check you out, and if you were a good candidate, it's not what you promised to do in the future, it's just what you have done in the past. That would count. So as a leader, you always mention that to people. Don't keep me on as a leader because what I promised to do for you. Take me on as a leader because of what I've done in the past.
So leaders, especially politicians, have this dilemma, right? Short-term gains versus long-term gains.
Yeah.
So I know we talk about trade-offs.
Yeah.
So as a leader, how do you make this decision? Because it's also about populism.
Yes, long-term gains always. That's why you could very easily ordain 4 women as bhikkhunis. It was short-term losses, more problems, more work to do. But long-term, it's worth doing. Number 1 is not doing it. I would not be able to live with myself. I would not being, it would challenge my integrity. I say one thing to people and I don't take the opportunity to do something for women when I have the opportunity. So first of all, it's a sense of integrity and honesty. And the main reason, because women wanted, they asked. I didn't look for some women, I want to ordain someone, will you ordain? And they said, no, but we asked, can we ordain please? And it's also something which, I have got a brain, so I did study my Dhamma and my Vinaya, learned Pali. And so you may know that when the Buddha became fully enlightened, Mara tried to tempt him many times, tried to prove that he wasn't really enlightened. But eventually Mara gave in. He said, okay, I admit it, you are fully enlightened. You're an arahat, well done. But don't go around teaching people because it's so burdensome and you get tired. You've worked hard to become enlightened, just enjoy it. And the Buddha said, no. He said, I will not leave this world until I've established a very strong sangha of monks, many of them enlightened, until I've also established a strong sangha of bhikkhunis, many of them fully enlightened. until I've established a strong group of upasakas, male lay followers, a strong group of upasikas, lay women followers. And he called those, the four parisas, the four almost like pillars of Buddhism. When I've done that, then I will leave, because I know that Buddhism will be self-sustaining from that point on.
Speaking about self-sustaining,
Yeah.
there are numerous studies to show that people embracing Buddhism is on the decline. However, the interest in mindfulness and meditation is on the uptick. And I think diversity and inclusion is quite a big part of this thing about sustainability. How do you think the religion needs to evolve?
How it needs to evolve is that mindfulness is very popular now, but what people teach as mindfulness is just a fraction of what mindfulness truly is. And meditation is marvelous, but how many people can actually teach meditation in a really powerful way? And so because of that, there's so many laymen and laywomen who make a career out of teaching meditation. And what they teach is just sometimes so far away from the truth which the Buddha said. Because the thing they're missing is, first of all, virtue, and then also renunciation, which is part of virtue, and the sense restraint. So without that sense restraint and that virtue, that the peace and stillness of the mind is impossible to get. But it's because they don't have as much renunciation, they don't get so deep in meditation.
And how do you relate enlightenment and leadership?
Oh, if you're a Buddhist leader, at least you have to know what the Buddha taught. You have to have that, again, because otherwise people will not follow you, because they don't want to follow you. You may be right, but you've got to convince people you're right as well. And then it becomes inspiring and uplifting for people. Look at the Buddha and his disciples, including the Bikunis. They're incredibly inspiring. And they became leaders themselves. And I'm going to take the opportunity of mentioning one of my favorite leaders in the Sangha in the time of the Buddha, who happened to be a bhikkhuni. And that was Patachara. I don't know if you remember her story. She lost her 2 children, her husband and her parents on the same day. She had no one afterwards. And that was such a traumatic event for her that she went crazy. And she was just wandering in the village or the town, Sawati. She didn't know what she was doing. And she happened to wander into the Jeta Grove monastery while the Buddha was giving a talk, and they put a robe around her, and he started teaching her. She soon became a fully ordained bhikkhuni, and next she became fully enlightened. And the reason I mention her is that in the Therigatha is the verses of enlightened women in the time of the Buddha. She really stands out. I was reading all these verses of women who became enlightened. They said they were meditating for years and getting nowhere, and then this amazing teacher came and taught them, and they got the understanding so quickly and became bhikkhunis themselves.
Yet nuns don't get the same kind of respect as monks. And this happens even in the secular world, right? We see that in business, we see that in leadership.
At the moment they don't, in many countries. But again, take the example of Scandinavia. The Finnish Prime Minister is a woman, young and very, very good. And even Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand has done a great job. So in some countries, they give that equity, that fairness to women, and they benefit enormously from it because I've had these bhikkhunis, which I've been looking after, I give them a lot of independence. I'm really fascinated how they can teach things which I can't teach, how they can relate to people from their experiences which are just foreign to me. It's so wonderful. We need you. And when you have that equity there that women can teach, women can lead, and they're respected, it's such a huge resource which we're not making use of.
And at one point, when you finally depart from this world that we live in, what do you hope to leave behind?
Leave behind just the original teachings of the Buddha. So just how wonderful they are, and how they work, and how they can be inspiring, and you help their lives enormously. And that's a very great privilege. I feel wonderful. You actually are making a difference in people's lives. And people see you and they want to shake your hand and say thank you. So that's what I want to be remembered by. Just not the big things, but the little people you've helped along the path.
On this note, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your humor. It's indeed a pleasure and honor speaking with you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure too. You're very soft. So anyway, thank you for your kindness.
Thank you.
Very good.